I met Rodney King back in 1997. I'd asked him to come speak in my class at Cal Poly Pomona. And I remember the day that he came for his presentation. I met him in the parking lot, and he had a tie around his neck, but he couldn't tie a tie. And so I remember tying his tie for him and walking about 300 yards up to my office. And I remember him being so amazed that I was a professor. At that time, Rodney was about 32. I was 30 years old. And as we walked to the class, of course, people saw it was Rodney King, and he had celebrity status at the time. And we cultivated a relationship over time. I taught him how to swing a golf club. I played tennis with him. I worked out with him. I gave him books to read. And I would consider during that 3-year period between 1997 and 2000, I considered myself his mentor. He would come from time to time and we would talk. And I remember talking to him about March 3rd, 1991, where 4 LAPD officers shot him with a stun gun, a 50,000 volt stun gun. And they hit him with a baton 53 to 56 times. And thank goodness for George Holiday, because what he did with that videotape was he changed the landscape of how we saw the police. Of course, you've always had police violence. Of course, you've always had police brutality. But when it was recorded, it was not just for African Americans to see, because this was for the world to see. African Americans already knew this was going on. But it was that George Holiday videotape that really revolutionized information when it came to police brutality and police violence. And so what you see right now is the continuation of what Holiday started with, the videoing of police behavior. So I did get a chance to talk about the trauma. I talked about the damage that did to him. I talked about how that humiliated him. And I did get a chance to talk to him about the famous statement, "Can we all get along?" And according to Rodney, it was just spontaneous. He felt like it was natural. He didn't think about it. He just said it because that was his spirit. But I think the question now, we're 28 years removed from Rodney King. We've just experienced something that is absolutely horrible, absolutely brutal. Rodney was beaten, but he was not suffocated to death. And so what we've seen with George Floyd has galvanized a new generation of activists. So what we have is the question, have things changed? And my response to that question is, the more things change, the more they seem to stay the same. And what I say about change in the United States, it seems to be the illusion of change.
I spent almost 30 years in the California Department of Corrections.
I just got out of prison in 2017 after serving 26 years on a 15-year life sentence.
I spent 26 years in the California Department of Corrections.
I spent 33 years and 8 months in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation.
Did 23 years and 8 months from the age of 14 to the age of 38 in the California Department of Corrections.
I've spent more time in prison than in jail than on the streets in my lifetime.
As a juvenile, at 16 years old, I was convicted for a crime where nobody yet got hurt, but I was tried as an adult and I served 18 years in prison.
Thinking about where I grew up in McDonough, Georgia, I can only imagine a white man coming to a young black guy who he calls a thug and telling this young man to pull his britches up. He then tells him, I want you to go to school. I want you to be mannerable. I want you to be disciplined. I want you to be focused. I want you to become educated. And I want you to be a humble person. And the young black guy looks at the white man and he says, oh, you want me to be like Obama. But you hate Obama just as much as you hate the thug. So what type of black man do you like? That same person travels 30 miles up to Atlanta. And he tells the same type of young man that he calls a thug. He said, son, don't burn these buildings up. Don't loot. There's a better way to protest. And that young guy says, so what do you want me to do? Take a knee? But you hate Kaepernick and those taking a knee in the NFL just as much as you hate the ones who are burning down the buildings and looting. So what form of expression of protest do you embrace from black men?
I believe that America is a myth. America is a nightmare for a black man.
The contradictions, the violence, the pure ugliness that exists in American society begs the question, is the concept of America a myth?
For me, the George Floyd murder is, people were shocked in this country.
With everything that's going on right now, I chose to speak up because this has been going on for decades.
Because, we look at this thing as, the land of the free, prosperity and these things. But to me, America is a myth when it comes to the black man, because the black man, we have to work twice as hard and we still don't get a leg up.
Nobody cares what's going on in our communities. We're of color, so therefore we have no rights. Regardless of what this American dream is, the American dream doesn't apply to us.
I believe that when you look at the penal institutions in the state of California alone, it's heavily populated with young black males. So it's a nightmare. And our dream is, I think that we succeed if we make it past 25 and we have not seen the cemetery or we haven't seen the inside of a jail cell.
People of color became enraged because it's not the first time we've seen it. We see it in live, in real time, constantly, every day. Growing up for years, I've seen George Floyd incidents happen over and over again. Fortunately, I'm alive, but I've been a victim of the same type of treatment, just because of my color, where I lived, where I grew up. Everybody was basically, guilty of something. They pull you over. Does a white person get pulled over and they ask them, hey, is there any guns in the car? Is there any drugs in the car? Are you on parole? Are you on probation? These are questions that are asked no matter who you are. If you're a black person, in the community, do white people have to answer those types of questions? No. So for people of color, the ideal of the American dream of equality is all a myth.
It's a reality to some, but to some it's a myth, because we never find that America. We never find the American dream because we're held in these communities and not being able to progress.
And for me, it was a little bit different because being half black, half Mexican, there's not many blacks in East Los Angeles. So I was really targeted.
We're basically tied down. They make us fight against each other.
I understand that, the American dream, or what they want to call it, is an ideal. But the ideal is not accessible to everybody, even in this day and time.
I will never live the American dream because of my color. I'm not the right color. That's basically what it comes down to. I don't get the privileges that another person gets.
I do believe America is a myth. I think it's a myth for a specific group of people. when we think about Black people specifically. We talk about other groups, other marginalized groups in this country, undoubtedly. I think about what we understand to be the American dream, our access to certain economic pockets, our access to certain type of equity and equality, our ability to continue to move up the social ladder and our ability to engage politically and to have some type of like transformational impact on the country. Yes, for us, it's a myth. And I'll speak for Black people. I won't go into a lot of detail about the other marginalized groups that I'm speaking about, or that I'm speaking in reference to. But yes, for Black people, it's a myth. I think that's clear.
The white people don't have to worry about getting pulled over and pulled out of their car and having to sit on the curb and getting their car searched. That just doesn't happen to them in white neighborhoods.
We have to act like animals in order to get somebody's attention. But why should we have to go to that?
Just like the whole presumption of innocence. If you're arrested or if you're pulled over in a white neighborhood, the presumption of innocence is there. But if you're in a Black community, it's a presumption of guilt.
I don't understand. We're human beings just like everybody else is. We're human beings just like these cops. I'm not saying that every cop is bad, but the system is bad. And there's nobody doing anything to fix that. They're putting them out there. I don't know if they got picked on in school or what, but they come out angry out of there, and their target is Blacks and Mexicans. I was in prison for 26 years, and the majority in prison is people of colors. What is it gonna take for us to change this? Yes, they say that they take these people to court, and they say, but the jury, you pick a jury that is gonna find them not guilty. When I was arrested, I had an aiding and abetting charge, and I had no bail. This man killed this man, and he had a bail, a $500,000 bail. I had no bail. What's the difference? My color? That's the only thing I could think of.
Drive down the street, and they just pull me over for no reason. I'm following the laws of driving. I got my license. Back then, you didn't have to have insurance, but then when I did have to have insurance, I had insurance, and they would just pull you over automatically. And but it's not like a regular person getting pulled over. You get pulled over, they pull you off the car. Sometimes they have you on your knees. Sometimes they have you on the curb. Sometimes they're handcuffing you. These are types of things that people in society, if they're just driving down the street and they get pulled over, they don't have to deal with. But we have to deal with that on a daily basis, every day. Every day you're driving down the street, you see some Hispanic or Black pulled over, they got them on the street curb, sitting down, ripping their car apart.
American is a myth. Like, take for instance, the pursuit of happiness, supposed to be equal for everybody. But that's not always true. And I think that is just based on our circumstances and what we make up. Take for instance, this incident that we speaking of. One of the things that resonated with me is that this is not the only incident that took place in America where people are protesting. You take the first incident, I was probably like 12 when Rodney King got beat. And then people started rioting and protesting, tearing up our community, especially in Los Angeles. And then that sort of behavior continued, the injustice continued for years and years. So that's nothing new to me, especially under America. And it's just frustrating and it's heartbreaking.
In our society, it is easy, if we go back to the U.S. Constitution, recognize how we came here as a people. We will not look as a whole, but we will look as a portion, 3/5. And that particular ideology has remained over the years.
For me, if you have 3/5, you're only 3/5 a human being, you only have 3/5 of a right of any law that exists. And so until we could be recognized as full citizens and having the same rights as white people that have been able to benefit from white privilege, then it remains a myth.
It's a myth and a dream to certain people, and I would say to African Americans, it's a myth.
I'm formerly incarcerated, having been incarcerated within the California Department of Corrections for 14 and a half years. It's been 14 and a half years since I've been home. Right now, this year, I'll be 54 years old. I am the son of Haitian immigrants. And the question is the American dream a myth? My parents came to this country for the American dream. And one of the things they did was they wanted to make sure I had the best chance to achieve it. So they made sure that I would be, as some people would say, very American. They made sure I didn't speak any other language. They made sure that I really paid attention to the culture of being American because they wanted me to have the most access to power. And after all this time of my life being here, I would have to say it is a myth. It is a myth unless you completely acquiesce to the powers that be. And to acquiesce means that you will have to totally embrace the total American bravado and the culture that's created that makes it stand above and beyond everything else in the world, and including your own culture, your own people, your own histories. And if you don't do it to the full extent, then the dream is completely a myth. And even if you do it to that extent, it's always a dangerous proposition because at any given time it may turn on you due to the fact that you are not part of the predominantly white culture. You will appear that you're part of the culture, but you're not. At any given time, it can turn on you when it suits their needs. And that is the big challenge for most people, especially the people who come here, is they believe that if they comply and they become complicit with the American culture, then they can achieve the dream.
The reason why I say I've lost faith, I'm 78 years of age. And I've always believed that you can, but I've seen more and more evidence that you can't. Because I'm not too sure, well, I'm not sure, or I know, stop it, Oliver, that a majority of people do not understand what Black Lives Matter and their campaign Zero is all about. And there will be those people, even blacks, who will say, well, come on, Oliver, it's not just Black Lives Matter, it's all lives matter. But wait a minute, what's going on? We're not talking all lives, we're talking about the continual over and over application of police violence against members of the African American community, African American males. That's who we're talking about. So let's not confuse the discussion.
I had a conversation with one of my family members the other day, and they're a Christian and whatever, and he's posted some stuff about we need to recognize the great history of this country. He has a big picture of, he's Hispanic. It's like, what history are you talking about that was so great? What point in time? And that's what people are talking about. What point in time was America so great that you want to return to? Was it the time of the Jim Crow era? Was it the time of slavery? Was it the time when they went to Africa, came over here and brought slaves to the Americas? Was it the time where they came in and slaughtered the indigenous Indians from the United States and abroad? I mean, what point do you want to return to?
It's directly in conflict and in line with what we understand to be the power of white supremacy. It has to. It's an agent of it. It's a weapon of it, right? And the police have always been, I guess, a conduit of how white supremacy is rolled out in these different places, in our communities historically. It's always been that way. They've always been the guardians of white supremacy. Is what my friend would say. His name is Oise.
My experience that I bring to bear in this area of being in Riverside County Sheriff's Department, starting out as a deputy sheriff and rising to the level of chief deputy. And then I got the pleasure of being appointed police chief in the city of Inglewood and stayed there for over a 5-year time period. And again, coming there during the time of Rodney King, that's what I bring to the table of examining and understanding what's going on. And now my courses are taught from a point of view of what are the implications of laws being created and implemented and enforced.
You could give all the cops all the video cameras you want, but if they could turn them off on their own when they choose to, and that's the problem, is that the video cameras that the cops been recording that Barack Obama had put into play for policy, they've been able to manipulate that and also be able to close door those videos where the public can't even see it. But it still doesn't matter, because the fact of the matter is, no matter how many video cameras these cops have on their body, people have cameras. And that's what's bringing to light all of the true injustices, is that we're doing it ourselves with our own cameras when we see this type of brutality happen. It's just the fact of the matter that the pandemic was just a candle box that lit everything as one.
I watched a video on Facebook, and knowing that the officer would not even check on him while he was on the ground talking about "I can't breathe" was just show of a lack of impulse. So
when I saw the George Floyd video, the first thought that went to my mind was, not again. I did not think that this incident would have such an impact on our society, because I myself, as seeing a lot of police brutality growing up in the inner city, I have become somewhat desensitized to it. So when I seen it, I was just like, oh no, not again.
As for the George Floyd situation, when I seen that occur with him, I just knew that this is just something that's ongoing, and I wasn't for surely aware that it was gonna blow up the way it did. But the fact of the matter is that people have had the opportunities to be able to sit at home and actually think about how the policies are actually affecting them as people, not just as a color, but as people. And it just basically caused the uprising inside the community. So I believe that's the reason why the injustice and the equal treatment is such a powerful movement right now.
He had detached himself from the situation, period. He couldn't even begin to hear George plead for his life. That plea and that same desire that the police had when they arrested me was the same desire that I believe that officer had when he had George on the floor. And that was to break it. He was trying to break a human being who he felt challenged his authority.
When I saw the video of George Floyd being held down by this man's knee, not only did it bring back it's like PTSD. It brought back memories of things that have been done to me. I thank God that today I'm alive, but the fear and the pain and everything else just comes right back up. And I ask myself, when is this going to end? Because this man lost his life, and I have had friends that have lost their life, and they complain about how we protest, how we lash out. But what are you doing? When we protest peacefully, you don't hear us.
I'm a convicted criminal as well. But does that make me any less human? So at the end of the day, I see a human being on the ground screaming for help. And whether he had a negative past or a positive past, he was still a human being at the end of the day.
In terms of what Candace Owens said, that this man that George Floyd was a criminal and that they're making him a hero. Well, let me tell you something. Regardless of what our past is, some of us have paid our dues. So that doesn't mean that because we did something in the past or made certain choices and decisions in the past that you're gonna hold me liable to that for the rest of my life. You know, people change. In due time, we do change. We go through a process of changing, and we shouldn't be held accountable for something that we did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, and still be considered a criminal when nobody's saying nothing when you're taking my taxes when you're out of my paycheck. So I should be having the same rights as the next man because this is wrong. Did he commit certain wrongs in the past? Yes, he did, like we all do. Nobody's perfect. But you can't use that to justify his death. You can't use that to justify anybody's death.
And so I remember applying for Riverside Sheriff's Department, got the job. LAPD didn't They came by later on. And so going through training, and the training is mandated in California by what we call an agency, California Post, Peace Officer Standards and Training. And it's very regimented as to how officers are supposed to react when they're out on the street doing their job. And so September 65 was right after August of 65. So if you know anything about history at that time, that was the WAPs, uprising, riots, whatever you want to call it. And so what has happened when I look back, 1965, 2020, in the area of police practices, and you can say violence, because there is a misapplication of the practices that we are taught in the academy, no matter what the training might be, and there is hours of training. But when I come out of that training session and I must apply that in the field, I bring my own set of values into it, and I decide how I'm going to do it because of two things. Number one, the U.S. Supreme Court has decided that officers will be given qualified immunity for them doing their job. Immunity, like an immunization shot that you will give your child going to kindergarten against certain diseases. Well, officers are given this immunity because of the so-called danger and stress of doing the job, and so they will not be held liable for their actions, even if the action is wrong. In U.S. versus Leon, a U.S. Supreme Court decision, again, we're dealing in the area of a warrant service. The officers made a mistake in going to the wrong house, and so what happened is that they ended up carrying out their duties, and it was brought up, well, they went to the wrong house, and they should not be allowed to enter this evidence into the court's trial. But the U.S. Supreme Court said, well, in that manner, the officers were trying to do the right thing. And because they were trying to do the right thing, even if it turned out wrong, we will give them this good faith exception that they were operating in good faith. And then along with the immunity, qualified immunity, because there are three levels, officers have immunity, attorneys, district attorneys have immunity called functional, and judges have absolute immunity as they are carrying out their particular cases. So all of this, when you look behind all of these impediments toward finding officers liable, if not guilty of a criminal matter, give them a certain hedgerow up that will keep them from being held responsible. And if anybody is being held responsible, it will not be them, it will be the jurisdiction that hires them.
When you have like the discretion to take life, you can decide who to kill and not to kill based on how you've not only been trained, this particular community that you've been inculcated in, that's the type of power, that's the type of space that police occupy. And it's not only frightening, but I was talking to a colleague the other day. He's a police officer. He made a comment on Twitter. He called me, and he made a comment essentially trying to explain that we need to figure out what happened before the guy put his knee on George Floyd's neck. And I expressed to him, I said, no, it doesn't matter what happened before at all. He could have been waving a knife at the officer. The officer had already incapacitated him. George Floyd had already been handcuffed. There was no reason for him to keep his knee on his neck. For the amount of time that he had his knee on his neck, he felt life leaving that man's body. He still stayed there. I think he even smirked, right? And I think it's an honest reflection of not only the power that police have, but also how the spectators, like those who are viewing it, how they feel like they are powerless. There's nothing that you could do in that moment. Whatever you decide to do in that moment, beyond that camera, you could put yourself in harm's way also. And I was asking him specifically, what is the public supposed to do? If a police officer approached me, gun blazing, and for some type of reason, I was able to get to a weapon that could protect my life, there is nothing under the state, there is nothing legally, nothing under the law that protects me. It don't matter what I do, it don't matter if it was in self-defense. If that officer loses his life, I'm almost going down for capital punishment 9 times out of 10. We're not protected, but the police is protected. No matter if they're committing murder, no matter if they're committing sexual assault, no matter what they're doing, that some of the most heinous crimes, they're protected.
I was talking to some friends about this, right? And we were talking about the knights in the medieval times, how they would protect the towns and the people, and they would fight for the people. And people want to believe in the knights because the knights have took an oath to protect them, to fight for them, you know. And so when the night falls, the society want to come together and they want to protect the night. That's why you have so many people, officers or whatever, that they can go do wrong, and then when they do a charge, they're acquitted because society wants to believe the night, because the night is the one, you know, they have their police officer badge. They ride around in their police officer car. They got their guns and they got their lights, and they have this stigma about themselves that I'm here to protect and I'm here to serve you. And so the media they portray us in such a negative way where it influences society that if he didn't do this, he did something else. A young black man is portrayed as angry, aggressive, and violent in our society. So they believe that if he didn't do this, then he did something else. If he didn't do that, then he's capable of doing this. So they want to believe in their night, and they want to protect their nights when their night falls. And that's why we have so many verdicts come back saying acquittal, acquittal, acquittal. And society that is sitting in that jury box, they're winking at the night saying, you got us, now we got you.
And they have to understand that white privilege can't exist anymore. It just cannot. It cannot. That privilege needs to be extended to all communities. That if you get pulled over, you're a citizen. We pay your salaries. You work for us. The military works for us. It's a civilian military, not the president's military. People need to understand these things. And within the police force, it's a whole different dynamic because it goes beyond race. It goes beyond race. It goes into like the police are a race in themselves. They're a race in themselves. They see themselves as above the citizenry. They see themselves above other people. They believe they hold a special status in this world, in this country. You know, you kill a police officer, you get the death penalty. I believe that a police officer under the color of law kills someone intentionally, he should also get the death penalty because you're operating under the color of law.
On the night of the Rodney King riots, myself and a group of friends had an altercation with a group of male Latinos, which eventually sent me to prison for 26 years.
Rodney King was very pivotal in this whole discussion because prior to that, there were a number of incidents of police violence as to how they dealt with African-American males primarily. And so we were always saying, even of those of us who were working as law enforcement officers, were always saying, you know, man, it sure would be good if we had a video. Well, that morning, George Holloway, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, heard a commotion outside of his apartment complex. And so he got his camera, he looked out, saw what was going on, rushed and got his camera, came back, and he videotaped what he saw. As soon as that videotape went, as they would call it now, viral, Chief Gates got back and said, no, wait a minute, okay. What you see is a anomaly. That is not normal practice. Well, what happened out of that, long story, is that that tape was played over and over and over again. And because of the so-called Sixth Amendment provision of a fair and impartial trial and jury, in a public sense, change of venue, which is another thing, being educated in this process. Going forward, we are going to need to understand what these terms mean and how they are applied arbitrarily when it appears to end up satisfying what their end result might be. And so what would happen in this particular case was the end result. We want to get those officers found not guilty. So they moved it from Los Angeles to Simi Valley. The demographics are 180 degrees from each other as to who will comprise the jury pool. And on April of 1992, the verdict came back. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. My officers in the Inglewood Police Department, I could hear them because my office was 2 floors up. I could hear them as they were cheering. What I found out later, the cheers were coming from the white officers, and the black officers were sitting there not happy at all. Problem is, in 2 hours, we're going to be faced with Florence and Normandy, Reginald Denny, who's been attacked because LAPD is not there, and the LA riots, uprising, whatever you want to call it, was in place. So what we find is that even though you have a video, and this is something I will caution you regarding Cloven in Minnesota, they have a video from different angles. What occurred in the LA situation with Rodney King is that the attorney, Michael Stone, came up with a novel approach. He stipulated to the jury that what they saw did occur. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, what I want to bring to your attention is what was in the minds of these 4 officers based upon what led to that use of force. And because of that, that was pivotal. The people ended up finding those 4 officers not guilty.
George was arrested for $20 bill that someone believed that he was counterfeiting. $20 bill. He was found guilty and sentenced to death right there on the spot for $20.
A fake $20 bill. Was it worth taking his life? You trying to tell me that his life was worth a fake $20 bill? Please, put him in jail. If he's guilty of something, put him in jail, but don't take his life. And that's how I feel. A lot of my friends have lost their lives behind that, things like that. I've almost lost my life behind that. And is it just? No, it's not. So for Candace Owens to go on and say that this man was a criminal, the criminals are them, because they're allowing these police officers to commit murder and they're not doing anything about it.
A question about my experience with the police too. So let me say this for the record. So I got out December 12th, 2019, after serving 23 years, 8 months. 3 weeks later, I was stopped by the police in Lake Elsinore, California. And I'm on a bike riding down Dart Street, and the police is at the stop sign, waiting. And they see me. I don't belong in this community. Most of this community, probably majority is white and things like that. So they see me and they looking like suspicious. So I pull up right on the side of the police door, and the sergeant who was in the car and his partner was a lady. And she was ready to jump out her car when I pulled right up. She was already trained to go, like, if you run, I'm about to chase you down. So immediately their defenses was already up. So he started asking me questions. He asked me what's my name, was I from around here, et cetera, et cetera. I said, no, but I'm over here. I'm in this program. And I just told him like that. He said, have you ever been arrested? I said, yes. He said, for what? Now, instead of me saying, well, I've been arrested for a crime or a felony or whatever, I told him what I was arrested for. Immediately the lights went on. They put me in the handcuffs, assumed the position, and also patted me down. Now, in those moments, prior to before, with the knowledge that I have today, I would have ran because I felt guilty or whatever else. I knew what I was doing or the lifestyle I was living was totally in contradiction to what was going on. So I probably would have ran from them. But I said, no, I'm not gonna be scared. I'm gonna stay calm. I'm gonna communicate with the officer so I can lower their defenses so they don't treat me as, are wrong in that instant. So I told them, I was truthful with them, and they let me go. Now that's just one instant out of many that I believe communication can be effective in how somebody treats you. Because yes, I told them what I was arrested for, and that's saying immediate red flags. He did his search in his background, his database. I checked out and he let me go. I told her, I said, you need me to call my parole officer? They like, no, you good. I said, all right, so you have a nice day. And I left. And that's just 3 weeks after being free.
So what's the point that you making though, Nashawn? Is it your point is it up to black men to just follow the rules and to try to de-escalate the situation? Or is it up to the officers to try to de-escalate the situation?
I think it's up to both. I think it's not only the onus is not only on myself, but the onus is on the other individual as well, who is the police. Because I can de-escalate a situation or I can escalate it based on my behavior. But I'm saying in the case, like if we talking about what reforms can be done, I don't think anybody should be in fear of an officer when they're approaching their car, but based on past history, psychologically is already ingrained in me. The police ain't no good, this and that, you know what I mean? So my attitude can change in that moment, but not to take away the shine or the light. The spotlight is really on George Floyd and him being treated wrong. That's the injustice in itself. So when I seen it, he was already on the ground with his foot on his neck, and how can you really communicate with an officer who's that out of touch with reality when he's doing that type of behavior? It's like what I say to you don't even matter. You don't treat me how I'm gonna be treated, and it happens to be that you was white and I'm black. So that's just the injustice I believe was going on. But I wanted to use that experience to piggyback on what was my experience like, my contact was like with the police.
Nobody's really noticed it because nobody hears our voices. And when I was growing up, there was no cell phones, so nobody was able to record the things that was going on. On one occasion, I was approached by 2 LAPD officers while on my way home from the park, and they asked me to stop. I stopped. They got out of the car, and one of them called me a wetback. So I responded with curse words. As soon as I did that, the officer behind me kicked me in the back, and while I was going down, the other officer hit me with a belly club up on my mouth, and they proceeded to beat me up, arrested me, and took me in. No charges were filed, only because there was a lady, she was a nun, but she was a teacher at the local church, and she seen the whole thing go down. But my parents' fear for retaliation, and since my mom was a non-documented immigrant, she didn't file anything and she didn't do anything. And that fear not only keeps us oppressed, but this is what's been going on all these years. This isn't the first time that this has happened. Many times I've been disrespected by police, stopped by police, manhandled by police, and our voices are never heard.
I was a juvenile that's never committed a crime before. But since I had scratched that car, I was still a 601 until I was found guilty of that crime. So I remained to still be housed in the public as a nonviolent juvenile. But once I went to court for that crime, for scratching the lady's car, she never appeared in court. She didn't want to come to court, and she didn't want to put me through the juvenile justice system that she knew that I would probably be face to face if she went to court and testified against me. So since she didn't come to court and testify against me, they told me that they would let me go home if I pled guilty to that crime. And so me not thinking of it, once I pled guilty to that crime, it took my status from 601 non-violent offender to 602, where I can be housed with anybody that's a juvenile that committed any type of crime. So that's how my level in custody changed, was because they basically told me if I didn't take the deal, for scratching a lady's car, I wouldn't be released that day. So I wanted to be released and go home where I was staying with my mom. And the only way to be released that day to go home and stay with my mom was if I took that plea. And from that point on, how I was housed in the juvenile justice system totally changed.
At the age of 19, I was arrested by the LAPD at 3 o'clock in the morning. They came into the home and I woke up to 4 guns pointed at my head telling me not to move. They took myself and the rest of my family, my mother, my brother, his wife, and her kids out of the house. And once they got everybody outside the house, they took me back in where they proceeded to beat me for at least 40 minutes. They took me from the house to the substation where the beating was to continue. It was about, I discovered later in this process that it was about them and their desire to break me because I could not submit to their authority.
Prior to my arrest when I was a juvenile, officers would do shakedowns, and when they would do shakedowns, they would basically pull up and tell everybody don't move. In the process of them telling us don't move, they would go through our pockets and they would take our money and they would basically tag our money and tell us that we can't get our money back unless we filed with the police station for that money back. None of us ever received that money when we was juveniles. We would just basically get our money taken by police officers on a regular basis during the shakedown. They then release to go after they take our money.
Growing up in South Central LA, as a young male, I remember that they would jack us up and they would have us lean forward and have our hands on the hot engine hood. And we would have to lean forward, putting all of our body weight on our hands. And if we removed our hands from the engine hood, we were threatened with either going to jail or violence. And the thing about it is, the significance of having our hands on these hoods, the car had been running all day, so the engine hood would be hot. And it would be burning our hands. And as you know, we're sitting there squirming in pain, the officers are standing by, looking, watching us, and they're laughing. You know, I have been assaulted by the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department. I have seen friends of mine being beaten, you know, or assaulted by the police as well, Los Angeles police as well. So for me, this was not uncommon.
So no matter the barriers that we face, we overcome them overwhelmingly, and that is perceived to be a threat psychologically to the white man. And same thing when an officer comes in contact with a black person, they already understand that the black person is a strong person. So that automatically triggers their fear in their brain, is that this individual can overpower me psychologically, physically. So this is probably another trigger inside the mind of a white man or a police officer or anybody in the police force when it comes to a black person, is because the black person actually wants to be treated equal, and they know that a black person will stand up for themselves, whether it's a one-on-one situation with an officer or more than that. Fear is always in the mind of the oppressor when it comes to dealing with a black man.
When I'm looking at these officers and I'm seeing these behaviors that's taking place around the world today, the accountability is not there. So if I was to work on changing anything, first I would begin with inside, the training that they're receiving.
They adopt this belief or have these principles to stand by. It's like saying, all right, I'm gonna follow this to the letter of the law, and I'm gonna exclude you, or I'm gonna treat you like this based on whatever. And at the end of the day, I think it just needs to be more communication, more reform, in the sense that, you know, a lot of this money or wherever it's going is supposed to go to education or things like that. But I think that the sensitivity training and things that they do need to be looked at differently, you know, looked at in a way that when they arrive on the scene, they see a young black person in a car and or whatever else, their defenses just don't go up because of how he's dressed or whatever else, like, you know, thinking the worst in the situation. So I know that can come with a lot of what they call that, because I think it's, when somebody have that, post-traumatic stress syndrome thing going on, the trauma and all that, it makes them hyper vigilant. So I think with officers, they're already hyper vigilant. They're already on high alert status. So it's always an approach. When I approach you, it's more so approaching you from the position that, if you get out of line, I'm gonna strike. As opposed to approaching to the position of, let me get to know you or speak kind to you and respectful and treat you as such before anything else occurs.
One of the things we were talking about is taking the implicit bias test before you become a police officer. It's an assessment tool that's already been recognized by the psychological community. And if someone's a prejudice or they're racist, it can detect it.
I believe that the rules of engagement need to be changed. Until the rules of engagement is changed, we're going to continue to have this very thing. And then we're going to have officers cry out that I was in fear for my safety. I was in fear for my safety. So if we can come up with some type of board or some type of commission on how officers engage Black men, how officers engage people, how officers engage someone that they feel is a suspect in a crime or anything like that, if those rules can be changed and you take out of the way out of the officers to say, oh, I felt that my life was in danger, then I believe that a lot more Black men will not lose their lives when they come in contact with police officers in America.
California's done a real change, though. I would caution you in January of this year regarding officers' use of force. Now, there's two penal code sections. One of them, Penal Code 196, that has been diluted down to an area of what's justifiable homicide that a district attorney can end up deciding. And they have strengthened greatly Penal Code Section 835A, which says how much force can an officer use in California when they decide to use lethal force. So no longer in California can an officer just say, the reason I shot the person was because I was in fear of my life. Now they have to go through an evaluative process utilizing their knowledge of the resources available to them before they pull the trigger. And what's going to be interesting about that is how is that going to be evaluated over time?
Right. One aspect is taking action, but one aspect is talking about it, really understanding that you're hurt. And once you begin to understand you're hurt, then you can begin the process of healing. But you can't begin the process of healing till you acknowledge the hurt. So that's the first thing. Whether it's talking to someone professionally, talking within your circles, begin to really give voice to what that hurt is. The second thing is taking action. In the protest, one question that has been asked is, where do we go next? But one aspect is you have to first be able to get out, protest, connect, right? It's bigger than one individual. So it's connecting to the bigger collective of people that hurt. And not only the Black community, but those who want to be allies, those who are from other cultures, other races who want to be allies, connecting. Begin to look at things like, what are the remedies to police brutality? It's not just firing people, but understanding what can we do in the face of when we have evidence of police brutality. One of the things people need to get knowledgeable of is what is called the McGregor decision. The McGregor Act, which is what gives police qualified immunity, people have to understand what that is. Because right now, most people think if they just see evidence of someone not acting according to the rules and regulation, that that's enough evidence. That's not it. If the officer or their defense are able to say they feared for their life or that they took an action they thought to preserve life, that's when the McGregor decision kicks in. And so we need to begin to look at that, how it's applied, and begin to understand that so we can know what evidence and what is the affirmative prosecution we need to take. So right now we're looking at an election year, but most people are focusing on the presidential election. But what we have learned over time is local positions are critically important to the communities so that we can have real change. The district attorney, that position, which is an elected position, is a critical position as we're beginning to see around. So we have to look at elections as a critical tool for the local communities to make real lasting change. And so we have to get out there and vote. I understand that a lot of people are focused on the presidential, and that's one aspect of it. But your local election for your judges, your DAs, police commissioners, all of those are important. I think the next step also has to be, we have to begin to look at movements or legislation that creates community oversight committees that actually have the power to address the police misconduct cases. So it can't be that they just oversight and then they refer it to the police commission. It is that the commission itself actually has the power to decertify police officers, not just fire them because they can go get a job in the next community, but decertify them from practicing being a police officer.
Well, Dr. Reese, I'm an abolitionist. I believe in abolition. And when I say abolition, I'm speaking directly to what it is that you're communicating right now. It's just we have to engage, we have to rethink, we have to re-envision almost every system that the black body has had to traverse since this country's inception. You know, I think in this moment we're focusing on police brutality as it is one of the institutions that I'm speaking in reference to, but we can't get rid of policing and then also still continue to support and depend on incarceration. You know, we can't address incarceration and not address the economic void that these different groups of people have to figure out a way to exist in. And we for sure can address all those things and not address our educational systems, right? And I think, so when I say abolition, I mean a total transformation of not only how we exist in America, but the spaces in which we traverse in America. Because all these things are interconnected. You know, there's a reason why my grandmother, her mother, and potentially her daughter is going to have to figure out how to survive alongside cancer, right? Those things happen because of a type of generational poverty, a type of generational lack of access to, you know, to the best type of doctors, to the best type of intake of nutrients, et cetera, which to me are all connected to what we understand to be the cycle of poverty, right? These things are all interconnected. And I think my thinkings have came here particularly because during these times, I've gotten a lot of calls. I've gotten a lot of calls from my friends, a lot of calls from my colleagues, attempting to figure out how they can continue to press forward, continue to fight, even after this moment has, you know, have come to a halt. And I think, you know, a lot of my advice to them has been to try to figure out where and how they can be informed by race in this country. You know, what they could do to continue to pull from the past and try to understand, you know, not only why this moment is so pressing and so important, but to also understand in what areas do these things overlap in. And I think once somebody understand that, you know, it's all these institutions together, then one can go to work as a doctor and understand where their fight is in this movement, right? And I think in order for us to get to a place where we can abolish the police and put things in place that allows for these social norms to be upheld in a way that, you know, that is in the interest of all the people who are engaged, I think that we have to understand that that we have to, in order for those things to happen, we have to understand that it is not only critical, but it is almost impossible for us to get rid of police. It's almost impossible for us to get rid of prisons without addressing these other institutions and without the fight being daily, right? Every day you have to get up, you have to be fighting towards something. And fighting doesn't always suggest some grand movement. It doesn't always take 1 million people protesting, but it could be the difference between, you know, you going to work and thinking about yourself as a doctor as simply someone who's an agent for that particular hospital, and going to work and understanding that when Black people, Black women come through your offices, that they're being treated differently, that you have to address them and approach them differently so that you might help in aiding and preserving their life, because death for Black people does mean slow and abrasive. It means generational and it means daily. Yeah.
I think in the final analysis, what we need is more empathy. And I think empathy is derived from the golden rule. And if you're a police officer, just ask yourself, can you see yourself in that situation? Can you see yourself as George Floyd? Can you empathize with him? Right? Can you see anyone in your family in that same situation? And I think if we start to think differently and we start to empathize with the plights of those who are being victimized, I think that's when our mindset, our behavior, and our policy start to change. I think this is one of those pivotal moments in American history where we have to have the courage and the moral compass to do the right thing. And I think deep down inside, we all know what the right thing is. The right thing always deals with empathy, sensitivity, compassion, respect. They're the same common denominators. It's called humanity. And so I think we all know what that is. I've been a professor now for 24 years, and I'm accustomed to my colleagues going to conferences and sitting on committees and subcommittees and steering committees talking about the problem. Everyone is intrigued with the problem, and few people want to get in the trenches and do something about the solution. So my question to the celebrities, the pundits, what are we doing in between the tragedies? What are we doing in between the young Black unarmed young man being killed? I think that's where the revolution is. That's where transformation is. That's where the change is. It's silently and quietly going about changing the system, changing our organizations, changing the way we treat each other. If you teach, let's teach a little bit harder. Let's not give up on those kids that you look at and potentially label as being incorrigible. Let's not give up on them. Let's mentor a little bit more. Let's embrace conversation with the people in our communities, and let's have the courage to embrace difference. That's where we are right now. I always talk about the South African concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are.